Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Southern California PGA Catalyst Series brought to you by PXG. Get ready to transform your game. With PXG, you'll experience exceptional quality and innovative technologies that produce real, measurable improvement on the golf course.
We are a fitting company.
Unlike anything else we go through, perfection. We approach everything with the idea that it's going to be fit.
Just maximum customization.
All I need you to tell me is, does it look the way I want it to? Does it feel good?
There's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. That's really where PXG stands out. Go farther, be more forgiving, and make it 100% right for you.
That's the experience we're all looking for.
It's just fun.
You need to go get fit for your golf club.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning on the Catalyst webinar series. We have with us this morning venerated SCPGA member, decorated tournament performer, and instructor at the Hodges Learning Center in San Diego. Gary Sowinski is joining us this morning. He is for a lot of you know Gary. He's a very colorful member of our section, participates in a lot of tournaments. Very strong player, has a very strong opinion. He is an inspiration to so many of us in terms of being a voice in the section. He is the 7-time Super Senior SCPGA Player of the Year. He's won the Senior Section Championship twice. Prior to coming to Southern California, he's won the Southern Texas Section Championship. He's won the Indiana Section Championship. He's won the Indiana match play championship, and he's joining us this morning. Dale, he'll talk a little bit about himself when we turn it over to him in a second, but what he's really going to talk about is his time and his apprenticeship under venerated PGA golf instructor Manuel De La Torre. Manuel De La Torre, for those of you, many of you know, you should know who Manuel De La Torre is, but he was actually the first PGA of America Teacher of the Year in 1986, the first year that the PGA of America had a Teacher of the Year national award. Manuel De La Torre was the recipient of that. He's in the PGA Hall of Fame. He's in the World Teachers Golf Instructors Hall of Fame as well. He was one of the first 12 golf professionals to be inducted into that, to receive that honor. He was the head golf professional at Milwaukee Country Club for 65 years, basically until his passing at the age of 94 in 2016. He taught Lauren Roberts. He taught Tommy Aaron. Tommy Aaron won the Masters in 1973, as you all know. It taught Carol Mann. Carol Mann, of course, won the Women's U.S. Senior Open in 1965. And he also played himself. He was a great player himself. He traveled with Felice Torza. He knew Mo Norman. He knew Tommy Bolt, knew Ben Hogan, knew Sam Snead. Great player in his own right. He won the Milwaukee State Open, I think, like 5 times. He was the son of a famous Spanish golf instructor, actually Spain's first PGA professional who won the Spanish Open 6 times. His father, Angel De La Torre, great story there. So Angel De La Torre was a Spanish golf professional. And in 1936, as the Spanish Civil War revolution was breaking out, Angel's wife, Manuel's mother, she got on a boat with her 2 sons, Manuel being one of them, and it was the last boat out of the port of Spain before the Civil War ended up closing that port for over 2 years. So they basically escaped to New York in 1936. Manuel is a small child and grew up in the golf business. Like I said, storied player, became a storied instructor, taught some very famous people. But I really don't know how Gary Sowinski came to know Manuel and came to spend time learning under him. President Allison Kurt actually reached out to Gary, and she is aware of his relationship with Manuel De La Torre and thought it would make a great catalyst to get Gary on and have him speak about his time with Manuel, both there, not just his time under him as an apprentice and learning his teaching philosophies and methodologies and how Gary applies that to his business, but also his time with Manuel as a friend. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the attendees this morning to Mr. Gary Sowinski of the Hodges Golf Learning Center.
Well, good morning. This is a pretty unique honor for me to talk about Manuel. When I wanted to get into the golf business, I had gone to see a golf professional. He actually worked in Milwaukee and then part-time in California, a gentleman named Paul Lemke. And he was at the Vintage. And when I went to Paul to get into the business, he had said there's only one gentleman you'd like to work for, and that would be Manuel. And so he helped me set up an interview with Manuel, and because Manuel was looking for an assistant at that time. And I went and I interviewed with Manuel for about 2.5 hours. And when I left, I realized that this man was not just a good golf professional, but he was a tremendous person. And he cared about all of his staff. He cared about everything. And when I was fortunate enough to get hired with him, my first day at the club, and when in Milwaukee, we started March 15th to get the golf shop ready for the year. And it was a tradition that he had. All the assistants would sit down in a sitting area in the golf shop. And the new guy would get up and kind of tell a little bit about himself. And then Manuel would ask you this one question: can you give me the definition of a swing? Now, that sounds quite easy, but when you really think about a swing, my first answer, I said, well, it's when you, and he goes, no. And all the assistants chuckled. And then one of the assistants said, no, we've all done this. So try again. So I said, well, it's when you start and you do, and he goes, no. So after about 10 minutes, Manuel, or maybe not 10 minutes, it felt like an hour, he said, go home tonight, look up the definition of a swing in a dictionary. So I did. That seemed too simple to me. So I went to the public library and went to the physics department and tried to find out what the definition of a swing was. So for all of you who are watching this or listening to this, see if you can write down the definition of a swing. Finally, I went to work the very next day, and Manuel's first question when he saw me was, can you give me the definition of a swing? And I said, yes. And he goes, what is it? I said, as a swing is a to and fro movement. That's it. He said, do you think you can teach people to do that with a golf club? And I said, well, yes. And he goes, okay, you'll have a great time learning to teach. Well, over time, you learn to understand that Manuel's philosophy of teaching does not involve what I will refer to as body movements. It involves how the golf club is moving in relation to the target line. And it involved geometry and physics and how the club has to swing. So you produce an action, and then the golf ball reacts to that action. And when you were learning to teach with Manuel, you would only start off in your first year or two, and you would teach the caddies at 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and then the juniors of the club at 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock on Fridays. And what Manuel would do when you were new, like I was, is he would walk along with you. And then he would show you what the students should be doing, and then you were learning how the club was supposed to move. And when you got a little bit further along in the business and you would be going down when he was teaching members, sometimes in the course of a lesson, and the members all knew this and they had no problem. A quarter of the way through the lesson, halfway through the lesson, Manuel would step aside and say to you, go ahead and finish. Well, while you were trying to teach the student, he was also kind of whispering in your ear, you see that? Do you see this? Do you see that? And then you were able to learn how to prioritize how one thing would change other things within the golf swing. And then as you advanced working for him and became the teaching assistant, you actually taught on the same lesson tee that Manuel did, but he was always teaching on the far right of the range and you taught on the left. So he could watch what you did. So for basically, I would say 7 years, I met Manuel every morning in the kitchen at 7:30, and we had his toast and coffee. We talked about the upcoming lessons that he had. Then we had lunch between 11 and 11:30 and dinner between 5 and 5:30. And we would talk about the golf swings. We would talk about the lessons. We would talk about everything that he would have seen me do and how to get better with it. So it was a very, very kind of unique learning experience. And then I used to go back when I lived in Houston, I used to go back to see Manuel. And my very, very last lesson with Manuel, he actually came out to teach me while he was using a walker. And I spent a little bit over an hour just hitting golf balls, and he was saying, yeah, that looks good. But the funniest story was when I lived in Houston, I had said to Manuel, I said, I don't understand this. I said, I'm hitting shots and I'm hitting them way left and way right. And he said, did you check your alignment? And I said, yes, I did. So he goes, okay, well, come on up. So I flew up, got to see him. And as soon as I set up for the very first shot, he goes, stop. And he went over and grabbed the golf club and took my setup and said, where is that aimed? And I said, oh my God, that's 20 yards to the right. And he goes, yeah. He said, you flew all the way up here just to fix your aim? And we basically didn't change anything in the golf swing, but he showed me some very, very unique things on what we do as people and how the aim changes in what we do and how, as he referred to it, how complacent we become as human beings. So it was overall, it was a very interesting learning experience.
So, his philosophy embraces a lot of physics and geometry in the golf swing, but his methodology is really rooted in a simple concept of swinging the club head. He was very candid about his disagreement with, the technical approaches of Butch Harmon, Sean Foley, Hank Haney, and he was, kind of outspoken in that regard. Can you talk a little bit about how his simple approach, and I think you alluded a little bit to it there with your alignment, how did you, coming up under him, incorporate that into your own teaching philosophy and methodology?
Well, when you started to understand how the golf club has to move, and I give you a quick example of, you hear guys say swing left, okay? Well, Manuel would always tell you, if you swing left, wouldn't the path of the swing be left, sending the ball to the left? So it was actually a funny story. When I lived in Houston, one of my friends was, and it was one of the Harmons that I knew. And I was over there, we were going to have lunch and we were talking about something. And he said to his student, I want you to swing this out to right field. And I looked at him and I didn't say much. And when we got done, I said, we're going to go to the sports bar and we're going to throw darts at $100 a dart, but you have to use that same concept in throwing the dart. He said, what do you mean? I said, you've got to make your arm go to the right of the dartboard. You can't make it go at the target. And he goes, oh my God. He goes, I was an idiot. I said, yeah. I said, you're telling a student to swing to the right to get the ball to go to a target. Manuel believed that basically what he would call, and it's referred to as the chords of a circle. The golf swing was a circular action swung around a center. And because of that, when the club would get parallel at hip high in the backswing, the shaft of the club is parallel to the target line, and the toe of the club would point to the sky. Then the club would go over the right shoulder, and the toe of the club would point toward the ground, and the shaft of the club is again parallel to the target line. Then the club basically again returns from the same direction it came away, hitting that same parallel. Then it would return square, strike the ball, continue on to be parallel to the target line and toe up, and then all the way on to the shoulder. So it's making a complete circle and it's swinging that way. When you hear people nowadays, they talk about holding the club face straight. That slows you down. It doesn't allow you to generate a consistent action because you're always interfering with something. Manuel sometimes use the kind of visual with a student of a Ferris wheel. He said a Ferris wheel is vertical, so the seats would move kind of in a straight line. If you took the Ferris wheel and tilted it, the seats now go around. And that's the same way a golf club swings. It swings around your center and goes around. And sometimes when you're trying to understand that, it seems like if you do it, the ball's going to go left, but it only goes straight. So it's a very interesting thing about how the club moves and how your arms move the club, not your body.
He
Manual,
also he also had a very interesting philosophy on the initiation of the downswing in terms of it starting from the ground and the feet and
right.
the decision to attack the ball. Can you talk about that? You had sent me a little excerpt on that the other day, and can you
Sure.
elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, Manuel always said, and you hear about this today, you hear people talk about using the ground for force. Well, Manuel, and this is also a very unique portion of Manuel's teaching. You called it a downswing. Manuel would never use the word down because the club went backwards, then it's a forward swing. If you called it the upswing, then you could call it the downswing. So that was an interesting portion because he said you want the terminology to be consistent. Something doesn't go back and down, it goes back and forward, it goes up and down. So that was part of it. So he said that the backswing, although your hands started to swing the club head back, everything started from the top. So as your hands would swing the club back, your shoulders would move, then your torso, then your hips, then your legs, then your knees, then your shins, then your ankles. Well, now because you're starting the swing using, and he over time changed a little bit because of some misconceptions that people had of anatomy. Your arms swing the club. If you ask someone to point to their arm, they basically go from shoulder to hand. But the arm is actually the point from the shoulder to the elbow. From the elbow to the hand is the forearm. So that caused some people to do what we refer to as casting. So he changed a little bit to have you use your upper arms. So as your upper arms would swing the golf club, the reverse would happen is because you're starting the action with your upper arms, the action literally started from the ground because that was the exact opposite chain of events. So the ground and the feet started the action, and you would allow the right heel to come up to allow the body to turn while the upper arms maintained the speed in the direction of the target to that toe up position.
So, in this day and age of kind of golf instructors maximizing their time and work-life balance and charging the appropriate amount for their golf instruction and not shortchanging that effort, Manuel was really kind of polar opposite to that. He loved teaching so much and he loved improving the average golfer. He's got that famous line where he'd rather give 1,000 lessons for $1 each than one lesson for $1,000. And it's like, it really speaks to how much he loved teaching and that passion. Really, I mean, it transcends to your passion as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you don't hear that very often.
No, Manuel, and this is kind of one of those things that I've maintained. Manuel taught from 8 in the morning until 6:30 at night, every day except Monday, his day off. He took a break from 11 to 11:30 for lunch and 5 to 5:30 for dinner. He was filled every day teaching members from, I believe it was from April 1st until September 1st. He could not teach non-members of the club until after 6:30. From 6:30 at night until dark in Milwaukee, it was around 9 o'clock at night when it was dark. He was filled with non-members and or tour pros. And he would teach them from 6:30 till 9:30 or till 9 or 9:30 at night when it was dark. And then we would sit inside the golf shop and talk about the swing to get them to understand it. The golf shop at Milwaukee Country Club was very unique in that it had an indoor driving range in the basement. So in the cold winter rainy days, he still taught downstairs from 8 in the morning till 6:30 at night, still teaching the concept of how the golf club swings. And when he learned from Ernest Jones, who talked about swinging the club head, Manuel changed it over time because he felt that the hands were too active in trying to make the club head get to the ball. And he found that when you use the arms, the club head responded more consistently. So that's really the only change from Ernest Jones's Swing the Club Head book to Manuel's Understanding the Golf Swing book, is that the arms are much more responsible for the swing and maintaining the speed beyond, we'll call it, the ball. The swing was always maintained all the way to the target, never to the ball.
And he was also very adamant about getting the student to not focus on hip movements. The hips and the shoulders were really, they moved in conjunction with the arm movement as much as the arms needed them to move.
Correct. Kind of a quick understanding of it. If the shoulders do the movement, the shoulders will move parallel to the ground. That would cause the club to move to the outside. If the hips do the movement, because of our bodies are built to counterbalance. So if I took my chest and leaned forward, my backside goes out. If I take my hips and slide them forward, my top half goes backward. So the center of the swing is always changing. So Manuel was, again, a big believer that you would maintain your balance, maintain your center, and everything would go around the center, again, with the arms maintaining speed to toe up and at the target.
So when it comes to his book, he wrote Understanding the Golf Swing. He published it in 2001. He actually started working on it in the late 80s.
Yes.
Since you were a friend of his, I was kind of curious, and I'm sure some of the attendees this morning are, how come it took him so long to publish that book?
Well, if you can consider, he ran the golf shop at Milwaukee Country Club. He taught from 8 in the morning till 6:30 at night. He taught non-members till 9:30 at night. Went home and did the book work from the daily operation of the club from 9 or 9:30 at night until midnight, and then worked on the book in his free time. He was a very, very dedicated person. And when he would read the things, he would sometimes read it and it didn't fit exactly what he wanted. He was very particular about it. That's why if you read the book, you'll notice he talks top hand, bottom hand. That way, a right-handed golfer and a left-handed golfer can read the book and not be confused, not have to try to flip it around. And that was also something in his teaching of, I'll say, me. He one time asked me, he said, "Can you play left-handed?" And I said, "Well, I never thought about it." He goes, "Well, you need to learn." And I said, "Left-handed?" I said, "Manuel," I said, "I'm a right-handed player." And his mentality for teaching was this. He said, "Well, Gary, don't you think at some point you're going to have to demonstrate for a left-hander?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, then you need to see that the concept works right-handed and left-handed." So I said, "Okay." Well, later in the day, when I saw him at lunch, I asked him, I said, "Manuel," I said, "just a quick question." I said, "Any other reason why I should learn to play left-handed other than demonstrate?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "I think you should understand the frustrations of a beginner." I said, "Oh my God." Now that was eye-opening to me. We as players or teachers who are proficient at the game, I don't think we understand the problems that a beginner goes through. Terminology, trying to comprehend it. Manuel threw a word at me, and it took me a long time to kind of understand it. He said it's called proprioception. And I said, "What is that?" He goes, "That's your brain's ability to track body parts in space. So your body is only accustomed to moving at a certain speed. And so when you start adding the golf club and your hands are holding onto it and you're swinging it, your brain is trying to track that. So as you start swinging something faster, you start losing it and then you go into panic because your brain isn't used to moving that quick. So you have to train your brain to track the golf club and the direction that it's moving. So he was very big into doing that along with the visualization. You visualize where the target is, you visualize where the club is, and from the top of the backswing, you're basically returning the golf club in the same direction that it came away, all the way to the target toe up. And you do that a lot by visualization.
He was a very grateful man. He was very humble. He attributed a lot of his success to him being lucky to having met so many great players and had the opportunities to work with them. And he attributes a lot of his notoriety that came from him teaching greats like Tommy Aaron, Carol Mann, Lauren Roberts, who of course won the Greater Milwaukee Open twice while he was working with Manuel. He had a lot of admiration for his father and the golf professional that his father was. And his father didn't teach any famous players, so that's in his mind, that's why his father wasn't as well known as he was. And kind of, I alluded to it a little bit earlier about his challenges with technical teachers and swing-based teachers like Sean Foley and Butch Harmon. He was very outspoken, and he feels that if Tiger would have never changed his swing and would have continued on the path that he was on 2001, 2002, that he would have never really had his fall from competitive success. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you knew Manuel very well, and I'm sure during the Tiger boom you spoke at length with him about this. Can you talk a little bit about his stance on Tiger's swing and the changes Tiger went through mechanically and what Tiger was trying to do and what Manuel thinks Tiger should have done?
Manuel thought that Tiger, when he saw his swing at a young age, he said, this is the best swing the golf business has ever seen. So before I get in a little bit into Tiger, I'll tell you two things with Manuel's teaching. One, Lauren Roberts, when he came to work with Manuel said to Lauren Roberts, he said, can you tell me what you tried to do? And Lauren's comment was very similar to this. He said, in the backswing, I'm trying to get my right hip to go back, my right leg to do this, my left knee to point at the ball, and my left shoulder to point at the ball. From the top of the backswing, I'm trying to get my right elbow to go at the ball and turn my hips through. Manuel very casually, as Lauren was leaning on his 5 or his 7 iron, reached over and took the club away from him and then said, let me see you hit a few. Well, Lauren reached for the 7 iron and Manuel took it around his back to the other side of his body. Lauren reached for it there. Manuel took it behind his back to the other side of his body. Lauren said, well, Manuel, I need the club. And Manuel said, oh, he said, in all the things you told me you were going to do, never once did you mention the club. I assumed you didn't need it. Lauren looked at him and said, what do you want me to do? So then Manuel explained to him what he wanted. And Lauren said, that's it. And Manuel said, well, pretty much, just show me how you can do that. And he explained the circular action, the return, the toe up. And Lauren started hitting it absolutely great. And then a few, I'll say years maybe before that, when Carol Mann was there, Carol had said she was nervous that she was going to lose her tour card. And Manuel asked her why. And she said, well, I'm not making enough money. And Manuel said, well, what does it take to make more money? And Carol said she had to make more putts. And Manuel said, well, what does it take to make more putts? And Carol said, hit it closer. And Manuel said, what does that take? And she said, well, I've got to hit better iron shots. And Manuel said, what does that take? And she said, well, I got to drive it in the fairway better. And Manuel said, what does that take? And she said, I've got to make good swings. And Manuel said, so if you make a good swing and drive it in the fairway, and if you're in the fairway and you make the correct swing, won't it go closer to the hole? And Carol said, oh my God, yes. She goes, I'm focused on the ball and not the swing. So she changed right then and there. And I can't remember, but I think she won 2 or 3 LPGA events in a row after that because they got back to the concept. And that was part of what Manuel said is we get caught up on results and not the process. But when he saw Tiger swing, he said this action is flexible, it's got speed, it's got direction, it's got a commitment. He said, if you look at his hands, how they hold onto the club firmly, you look at the speed that his arms generate, and you look at how his body just responds. You look at where that club is going. That club has a commitment to a target and not to the ball. And he said, this will be one of the best players golf has ever seen. And obviously, I would say if it hadn't been for some of his injuries, he would have been, or probably is, the best golf has ever seen.
So I got a question here from Luis Gaspar. And of course, for all the attendees on this morning's Catalyst, feel free to raise your hand and I'll read Gary your question so he can answer extemporaneously for the group. And Luis, thank you very much for reaching out. Manuel was a very big proponent of practice. You know, he had a simple methodology. He liked working with average players, but he prescribed a lot of practice, was a big believer in practice. Luis Gaspar is asking us this morning, he's curious, Gary, if Manuel had any certain practice routines or a process that he followed to improve motor learning.
Manuel's process for his practice was he would practice for 1 hour before he would go to a tournament. That was the only time he had. And he just talked totally about the understanding of the concept. And if you produce the action, everything will take care of itself. He believed that your commitment to move the golf club where it had to be and moving it there, the motor pattern would take care of itself. Because he said you can't control everything. You know, you hear so much today, and one of Manuel's things that when he would stress some of that to students, he actually pulled this on one of the tour players, and it was hysterical. Gave him a piece of paper and asked him, how many times in your life have you written your name? Player said, I don't know, 1,000,000. He said, in cursive, write your first name on this piece of paper. And I would tell everybody who's listening to this to try this. Write it on a piece of paper, directly where you wrote it the first time, not above or below, but directly where you wrote it. Write it a second time, and then write it a third time. And then try to explain to yourself how come you can see three distinctly different lines along the way. And it's because we cannot reproduce an action exactly the same every single time. It's impossible for us. But if you were to take those signatures and put them above and below each other and superimpose them, to our eye, we cannot tell the difference. So when you're producing a golf swing and you're making it to the way it's supposed to be, you're not going to hit every shot the same, but you're going to make many swings that are similar, and you're going to see results and swings that are imperceptibly different. But they're all going to produce a similar result.
So a question here from Bill Holbert. Thank you, Bill, for asking this. Did Manuel promote either upper arm being dominant on the backswing or the forward swing?
The arms were controlling the forward swing. The hands controlled the backswing in order to generate what Manuel referred to as the coiling action, much like hitting a nail with a hammer. Your hand would take the hammerhead back, and then the wrist bends, the forearm moved, and then the upper arm, and then the upper arm would return it. And that's how you generated the speed.
So Luis commented here. He said essentially the perfection is in the beauty of the imperfection.
Exactly, yes. We're people. See, and if when you start to understand, and I kind of will show you this real quick, our hands have dominant directions. So if I hold my hand up here and I asked everybody to slap my hand with their right hand and then slap it with their left. And if everybody did that, I guarantee you hit me with your palm. When your hand is moving in the direction of its palm, it moves in its strongest direction. So you hear people talk a lot about the club being, person has a flat swing. That generally speaking is not flat, because a 7-foot person and a 5-foot person have two different swing planes. Neither is flat. They're either on plane or they're not. But when your hand moves in the direction of their palm, it will overpower the other hand. So in the backswing, a lot of times, when your left hand takes over, the butt end of the club, instead of swinging backward, starts to move out, forward, and away from the body. So that when the club gets to hip high parallel, it is not hip high parallel. The club head is literally behind the body. So now that club is what we would refer to as laid off, not flat. So it can't return to the ball. So it can only return to the ball by a manipulated action. So you try to use both hands equally to swing the club back and over the right shoulder. And again, going back through the parallel and toe up. See, Manuel didn't believe in what we would recall, and you hear this so much. What did I do wrong so I can fix it? Manuel believed that you don't fix anything because every swing is individual. You just keep trying to do what's correct each and every time.
So Manuel talked about maintaining purpose in practice.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how you implement that in your teaching and how he implemented that in his?
We're probably identical in that. Is that you make a swing, and now you look and you say, okay, what did I do? And did I make this golf club? Did I produce the action that I'm trying to produce? And it's either a yes or a no. It's not a maybe. It's not I think so. See, if Manuel was really funny because he always would make you think a little bit by giving you an analogy. He said, if you went to the store to buy something for your family and you got home and your mother or your wife asked you, did you get everything? You would say either yes or no. You wouldn't say, I think so. The golf swing was the same way. Did you do it? Yes. Did you do it? No. And that was the purpose. The purpose was always to produce the action to the best of your ability. Not a question of that was close, that was this. Did I do it? Yes or no?
Any other final questions from the field? Gary, any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave the section with this morning?
Yeah, I think, again, for me personally, I keep the things that Manuel taught me were very important to me, and they've allowed me at my age to continually still play well. And what Manuel taught makes perfect sense. Like Manuel would sometimes, when he would see all of this stuff, see, my eye is as good as any video because I'm watching the golf club. Manuel did the same thing. We had a tour player bring video equipment, video some of his swings, and then we sat down. And before the swing even started, Manuel said, well, this is your fourth swing, and this is what you did. So as they ran it in slow motion, it was exactly what Manuel had said. So when you learn to watch golf clubs and watch the swing, your eye can be better. And Manuel would say in modern day teaching, as people talk about it, all of these degrees of stuff. He said, if you took a cup of coffee and drank it, how many degrees does your wrist bend? How many degrees does your elbow bend? Well, you can't do it. And Manuel used this, which I still use with students today, because I found it to be the most enlightening and shocking way to get a student to understand the importance of using the golf club, which Manuel called a tool to propel the ball from point A to point B. He said, if you were teaching a child how to cook an egg, and you handed them the spatula and told them to turn the egg over, what would you tell them to do? Generally speaking, you would say, take the spatula, slide it under the egg, and turn it over. That made perfect sense. Well, nowadays, teaching Manual would say, this is how people would tell you to do it. Slide the spatula under the egg, lift your shoulder, rotate your elbow, rotate your forearm, and turn your wrist. They never would talk about the spatula. And he said, so that's where the teaching now has become so technical that people cannot reproduce it. And because they can't reproduce it, they get away from the game, and or the teacher blames the student. Manuel was a huge believer that as a teacher, your job is to communicate to get the student to be successful. If the student is struggling, it's your fault. And I'll say now, it's my fault as the teacher because I'm not communicating to get the results that I want. And I have to figure out how to do that. So it was a very interesting aspect of teaching.
So Tom Matreyek has a question here for you, Gary. If Manuel were teaching today, how would he use modern technologies like TrackMan? And also, Bill Holbert, go ahead and throw your question in the question box in the chat, and I'll ask it from there like you did on the first one. But yeah, Tom, Gary, how would Manuel have used modern day technology like TrackMan?
I think he would have used TrackMan only to help students understand that the swing has the maximum acceleration and how that speed affects the ball flight. But he would have looked and said, you can already see that. And he would have used, I don't think, knowing what I know about TrackMan, I mean, I use Flight Scope with some students. I think he would have used it maybe with some of the tour players, but I honestly don't think he would have used it very much other than showing them how far they hit each golf club.
Okay. Bill, if you got a question, go ahead and throw it in there. It looked like your hand was up there for a minute.
See, I still maintain one thing that Manuel does, and it was funny. It was Manuel referred to it as a professional courtesy. Every golf professional that I've taught and that comes to me, I don't charge them for a lesson. It was a professional courtesy. It was Manuel used to teach his assistant staff. We couldn't schedule a lesson till after 6:30. But if a student who he had wanted a lesson, we would give that time to the student. But Manuel worked with us. I mean, one of the things that I found, and it helped me a lot, I was taking a lesson from Manuel and I started hitting some bad shots. And I said to Manuel, I said, I don't understand this. I'm thinking exactly the same thing. And on the lesson tee where Manuel was, there was a bench. And Manuel said, well, Gary, I'm thinking about going to sit down. But yet he never moved. And I said, I thought you were going to sit down. He said, well, I want you to understand this. You're telling me you're thinking it, but you have not taken that thought and turned it into an action. See, he goes, thought is one thing. Action is something different. You have to learn to take the thought and make yourself produce what you want. And that's where he would always go into the visualization. Visualize the swing. He said, you should be able to make a swing and know exactly where the club is through the entire swing. And when you finish the swing, you know that the swing was correct and you already know where the ball has gone. Or you know the swing was slightly off and you maybe got a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. It's a complete focus on the action of where the club is and where it's going.
So there's Bill's question. What drills did Manuel use and what drills were your favorite of his?
I would honestly tell you, never had a drill. Manuel believed again in the production of the action. The only real, if you want to call it drill, was taking the club hip high back, knowing that it was parallel, and hip high forward, knowing that it was parallel. Manuel was a firm believer that the backswing was, and I'm not going to say unimportant, but that the forward swing was the most important part because it's what hit the ball. And trying to always be focused on the forward swing. If there was ever a kind of a drill, he would kind of always focus that when you change direction at the top with your arms, you were always allowing the right heel to come up because that would then allow the body to turn and respond to the movement. If the right heel stayed flat, the ability for the body to respond was greatly reduced.
Yeah, another one of his famous sayings was a bad takeaway can be made up by a good forward swing, but a good takeaway cannot a bad takeaway cannot be a good takeaway cannot make up for a bad forward swing.
That's right.
So Jason Lundy's got one final question here. He's curious how Manuel taught working the ball left to right or right to left.
Well, he would show you, first of all, as far as working the ball left to right or right to left, it was not a concern of his because he believed that the ball should go straight, relatively speaking. Now, if you wanted to hit a ball left to right, he would say you would set up normal where the golf club, and this is the thing, the golf club is always in the middle because that's the center. And then you grip the club slightly open and you make a swing. And so when the club would get to the forward side, instead of the toe being up, the toe was to the right. And then the ball would curve a little bit, start off straight because that's the direction of the force. And then the ball would have side spin and curve a little to the right. Every player has, because of their speed, varying degrees of how much they needed to open or close the club face at address. And it was the same thing to draw. If you wanted to hook it or draw it, you would set up, grip the club face slightly closed, and make the same exact swing because the club face would then be closed at impact and cause the ball to curve. Manuel was not a big believer in you aiming left and trying to cut every shot because everybody's swing produces their own individual ball flight characteristic. So he said if the person hits the ball with a draw, that was fine. If they hit it with a cut, that was fine. There's a young lady or a lady that teaches at Newport Beach, Pam Higgins. She worked with Manuel for a long time when she played the tour, and she hated the ball to go to the right. And she always wanted to hit a draw. And I'd asked him, I said, Manuel, is that a problem? He goes, no, that's just her preference. But he said, that's her preference. But he said, I'm not going to try to change that. She likes that curve in the ball. So again, he didn't like when people were all, because he said, if you have to aim left and then cut it back to the right and you happen to hit it straight, you can be hitting it into trouble. So it was always working the ball or making the swing the same, whether the club face was open or closed.
One final question here from Tom Matreyek. What were Manuel's thoughts on club fitting?
Manuel was really big into club fitting. He would use a live board if he saw certain things, and we had a kind of outdated. It was called the Van L, and it was a club bending machine. And we would bend the clubs. Manuel would say, this needs to be 1 degree flat. This needs to be 2 degrees flat. It was actually kind of, and he was big into it because he felt that proper fitting helped the student become better. It was a club that one of the companies had made a long time ago, and Manuel didn't like the bounce on it. So we were talking. He said, I wish I could get some metal added to this. And I said, well, what do you want? My father's in a tool and die business. He can do it. He said, well, just have them put some metal on here and then we'll go ahead and we'll file it. So I took it. My dad did it. I brought it back the next day and I learned right there, bounce. I learned how Manuel liked the wedges shaped, how he liked bounce. And we would file it. He would hold it up and we would look at it. And he said, now this is what a wedge should be like. And then we would take it to the bunker and hit a shot. And he would show you that. And he showed you the original wedge, how it had a tendency to dig. And so he was big into proper fitting, proper shafts. When graphite shafts first came out, he wasn't a big believer in them because they had such high degrees of torque. But as they got better, he started liking them because the shaft was responding the way it should respond in a golf swing.
Fantastic. Well, Gary, that's just about all the time we have this morning. Very grateful for you carving out some of your time to educate us on Emmanuel De La Torre. I, for one, have learned a lot about him here in the last couple of days, and grateful for you coming on and educating the section. For all the PGA members that are on this morning's webcast, you will receive 1 PDR credit for joining us this morning and learning about Emmanuel De La Torre, learn a little bit more about Gary Sowinski too. And
John, if you can tell everybody, if they want, I have no problem. Email me a video if you've got a problem with somebody, and I would show you how Manuel would fix it. I have no
Excellent.
problem. I love doing that.
Well, thank you, Gary. So, also to that note, I'm going to send out the YouTube recording of this morning's webcast. I will CC Gary on that, so everyone that joined us this morning will have easy access to Gary, his contact information on there, and the recording of this morning's webcast. On behalf of the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA, thank you so much for joining us. Gary, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. For those of you who are going to be up here in West Covina next weekend for the annual meeting, look forward to seeing you then. And Gary, I know you'll be up here. And thank you, everybody. Those of you that won't make it to the annual meeting, have a great holiday season and a safe new year. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.